Is it getting hot in here?
All right, so we are wrapping up talking about pollution and solutions. And the question here is, what are the benefits and costs of actually doing the pollution cleanup? We've established that it's a market failure. It's a positive or negative externality makes the markets produce too little or too much, and that the market on its own will never solve it. It requires outside intervention. So let's remind ourselves of some of the benefits and costs of environmental laws and think about what you might add to this list. But some benefits of a cleaner environment: people stay healthier and live longer. Certain industries that rely on clean air and water benefit. Property values may be increased. People can enjoy a cleaner environment, and maybe there's not a way always to quantify it. What about the costs of environmental pollution reduction? It's not free. There is a cost of reducing pollution, and let's start thinking about the pattern of that cost. If we have a little amount of pollution, what we're looking at here is the cost of pollution abatement. So if you can think about how when you're at the very beginning, cleaning up is pretty easy. It's the low-hanging fruit idea. And so it doesn't cost all that much. But the more pollution you clean up, the deeper you're having to dig under the ground to clean it up, the harder you're going to have to work to get those last remnants up. And that's where the marginal cost really can be high. So there is an optimal amount of pollution abatement, and it's where the additional benefit causes the additional cost of that pollution abatement. So if we were to be able to estimate and know exactly how much pollution abatement costs and benefits, we'd be able to figure out exactly the right amount of pollution to reduce. What about the benefits? Why is the marginal benefit curve downward sloping? It's the same idea, right? The benefit of cleaning up the air in Beijing, the first 40% of the reduction in airborne contaminants is going to have a huge positive impact, more so than the next 40% or the next 20% or whatever. So again, the benefit and the cost of pollution have to be taken into account, and we think that optimal outcome is somewhere where they cross. And then, of course, this all comes down to preferences. Younger developing countries are going to find that the trade-off between economic output and environmental protection looks different than for rich, mature countries, right? Rich, mature countries have reached an economic output level that's so high that we can begin to afford environmental protection, whereas that's not necessarily the case when you're worried about where your next meal is coming from, when you are a country that has a lot of economic growth that needs to happen and a lot of people in desperation. It seems cruel to use any income that your economic growth generates to reduce pollution. Rather, we want to see people get jobs, we want to see people be able to eat, etc. So usually rich countries have more pollution abatement than poor countries. But there are other values as well. As climate change continues its pace, we have to think about the increasing costs of climate change. And basically, we're having to decide between current consumption and future consumption. How much do we want to leave for the kids and the grandkids? Is it possible that we're at point M and we could actually have more of both economic output and environmental protection? At any rate, the costs of neglecting the environment seem to be rising. And so most countries are finding that it's appropriate to start paying more attention to environmental protection and increasing that as a preference, especially because their populations want it. And speaking of populations, our environmental problems really go between countries, and so no nation alone can really solve the whole problem. So that makes the whole solution a little more tricky, but a lot of good people are working on it very hard. But here's some examples of the interconnectedness of the planet. We've got biodiversity. We've got the situation where dust storms and fires in California can cross whole oceans and affect other countries. And we don't even need to start talking about climate change. Historically, you probably know that high-income countries have been the main contributors to greenhouse gases and climate change by fossil fuel burning. The Paris Climate Agreement and others seek to become climate treaties that bind willing countries to reducing their emissions. So this is a super interesting and super complex topic. And if you're interested, and I hope you are, there's so much more to read about this. But basically, it seems unlikely that we're going to have some world government or a lot of different countries coming online and doing exactly the same thing. So probably the decentralized and market-oriented approaches are going to be the most appropriate ones going forward. But thank you to all the good brains working on this. Maybe you'll join them.